Right now, as you're watching this, something unprecedented is happening across 3 continents. More than 30 aerial refueling tankers just crossed the Atlantic in 48 hours. 4,000 Marines are steaming toward Latin America. Hypersonic missiles are being positioned on foreign soil for the first time. And carrier strike groups are converging on flashpoints from the Mediterranean to the South China Sea. This isn't a drill. This isn't routine. The U.S. military is executing one of the most complex, multi-theater force projections since the Cold War. And the world, especially America's adversaries, is watching every move. What's driving this massive mobilization? And what does it mean for the future of global security? To understand what's happening right now, you need to understand how fundamentally the strategic landscape has shifted. For decades after World War II, American military dominance was unquestioned. Carrier strike groups patrolled the seas with impunity. Regional conflicts were managed with overwhelming force projection. The doctrine was simple: be everywhere, deter everyone, and maintain the global order through sheer presence. But in the past 5 years, that calculus has changed. China has built the world's largest navy. Russia has fielded hypersonic weapons that can evade traditional defenses. Iran has armed proxy forces across the Middle East with sophisticated drones and missiles. And new flashpoints, from the South China Sea to the Arctic Circle, demand simultaneous attention. The Pentagon faced a choice: spread forces thin across every theater or develop a new approach. They chose transformation, multi-domain operations, distributed lethality, joint all-domain command and control. Fancy terms for a brutal reality. America's military must do more with less, faster than ever before, across more battle spaces simultaneously. And in 2025, that strategy is being put to the ultimate test. Let's start in the Mediterranean, where the USS Gerald R. Ford, America's newest and most advanced carrier, has been operating for months. But in late September, something changed. Dozens of KC-135 Stratotankers, the Air Force's aerial refueling workhorses, departed from bases across the Atlantic. Within 48 hours, they converged on Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, headquarters of U.S. Central Command. Open-source intelligence tracked every movement. Defense analysts noted this was the largest aerial refueling deployment since U.S. operations against Iran's nuclear infrastructure earlier this year. The tankers are critical. They're not the weapon. They're what makes the weapon possible. F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, and B-2 Spirit stealth bombers require constant refueling for deep penetration strikes. The fact that 30 tankers repositioned simultaneously tells you everything about what kind of operations the Pentagon is preparing for. Accompanying them, 12 F-22 Raptors, America's premier air superiority fighters, staging through RAF Lakenheath in the United Kingdom before pushing east. F-35s from the 48th Fighter Wing, the only permanently forward-deployed U.S. F-35s in Europe, deployed within hours. Why? Intelligence reports indicated rising tensions with Iran, which had issued explicit threats of retaliation against any attack on its interests. The Supreme National Security Council in Tehran had already begun designating successors to maintain leadership continuity during what they called a possible future conflict. But the Ford Carrier Strike Group wasn't alone. Operating in the Indian Ocean, the USS Nimitz Strike Group was positioned near Diego Garcia, a strategic U.S. base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Unconfirmed reports suggested a significant buildup of B-2 stealth bombers, C-17 transport aircraft, and additional tankers at the base. This is power projection at its most visceral, the ability to strike anywhere, anytime, from multiple vectors simultaneously. The message to Tehran is clear. Escalation will be met with overwhelming force across every domain: air, sea, space, and cyber. And it's working. Despite inflammatory rhetoric, Iran has been cautious because they know what 2 carrier strike groups, stealth bombers, and 5th-generation fighters can do. Now shift your focus 4,000 miles west to the Caribbean. In mid-August, the Pentagon announced the deployment of the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group and the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, more than 4,000 Marines and sailors, to U.S. Southern Command's area of responsibility. This deployment wasn't routine. Alongside the Iwo Jima ARG, the Navy allocated a nuclear-powered attack submarine, additional P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft, several destroyers, and a guided missile cruiser. The stated mission: combat drug cartels operating in Latin America and the Caribbean. But let's be clear about what this really represents. This is a full-spectrum amphibious assault capability positioned off the coast of nations where Mexican cartels operate with near impunity. The Iwo Jima ARG consists of 3 ships: USS Iwo Jima, USS Fort Lauderdale, and USS San Antonio. Together, they can launch helicopters, Osprey tilt rotors, and landing craft. They can insert Marines ashore by air or sea, and they carry an aviation combat element capable of close air support. Defense officials emphasize that the buildup is mostly a show of force, aimed at sending a message rather than indicating immediate military action against cartels. But it also gives military commanders, and the president, a broad range of options should the administration order kinetic strikes against cartel infrastructure. There's concern within the Pentagon. Marines aren't primarily trained for counter-narcotics operations. If drug interdiction becomes part of their mission, they'll have to lean heavily on the Coast Guard and DEA. But the capability is there, and the cartels, who have operated with relative freedom for decades, now see American amphibious assault ships, destroyers, and attack submarines on their doorstep. This isn't just about stopping drug shipments. It's about demonstrating that if the U.S. decides to treat cartels as hostile military forces rather than criminal organizations, it has the capability to do so. Some analysts worry about mission creep. Others point out that deploying expeditionary strike groups to counter cartels pulls resources from higher priority threats, particularly China in the Pacific. But the administration has made it clear: the cartels are a national security threat, and they will be treated as such. While the Mediterranean and Caribbean grab headlines, Europe's eastern flank is experiencing the largest U.S. Army deployment since the Cold War. Exercise Defender 25, the annual demonstration of America's ability to rapidly deploy forces across the Atlantic, kicked off in April. More than 17,000 U.S. troops joined 23,000 multinational service members from over 20 allied nations. But Defender isn't just an exercise, it's a statement. Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division conducted direct airborne insertions into Norway, one of NATO's most strategically vital northern members. Polish paratroopers jumped into Finland, which had only joined NATO in 2023. And Allied forces conducted jumps into Gotland Island in Sweden, a position that controls access to the Baltic Sea. The strategic calculus is clear. Russia, despite its challenges in Ukraine, maintains significant military infrastructure in Kaliningrad and the Kola Peninsula. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, remain vulnerable to rapid aggression. And the Arctic, once a frozen wasteland, is becoming a contested domain as melting ice opens new shipping routes and resource extraction opportunities. The USS Gerald Forward Carrier Strike Group didn't just operate in the Mediterranean. Between late August and early September, it sailed into the northern Norwegian Sea alongside French, German, and Norwegian ships, operating as far north as Norway's Svalbard Island. This was the furthest north any U.S. carrier had operated in recent years. The deployment demonstrated that American carrier power can project into the high north, the critical bear gap between Norway and Russia that Soviet submarines once used to threaten NATO shipping lanes. The integration with NATO forces was seamless. German frigates enhanced air defense screens. Norwegian ships provided local knowledge and anti-submarine warfare expertise. And the entire operation was conducted under NATO's operational command structures, a clear signal that the alliance is unified, capable, and present in every contested domain. For Russia, watching from Murmansk, the message was unmistakable: NATO controls the seas. And if conflict erupts, Russian naval forces will be bottled up in the Barents Sea, while American and Allied air power dominates from the Arctic to the Black Sea. But perhaps the most significant development of 2025 isn't about ships or planes. It's about missiles. For years, the United States lagged behind China and Russia in hypersonic weapons. Beijing deployed the DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicle. Moscow fielded the Avangard and Kinzhal systems. weapons capable of Mach 20 speeds and evasive maneuvers that make traditional missile defense systems obsolete. America's response finally arrived. Dark Eagle, the long-range hypersonic weapon, officially designated Dark Eagle, entered service with the first multi-domain task force by the end of fiscal year 2025. After years of delays and setbacks, the system successfully completed an end-to-end flight test in December 2024, and now it's deployed. Dark Eagle can strike targets up to 2,775 kilometers away, roughly 1,725 miles. Unlike ballistic missiles that follow predictable arcs, hypersonic glide vehicles maneuver during flight, making interception nearly impossible with current technology. The warhead doesn't need to be nuclear. At Mach 5+ speeds, kinetic energy alone can destroy hardened targets. The strategic implications are staggering. U.S. forces can now strike high-value targets, command bunkers, naval facilities, air defense systems, with virtually no warning. Adversaries can't see them coming until it's too late. The first multi-domain task force, which received the first battery, is designed to operate across all domains: cyber, space, air, land, and sea. They can integrate with carrier strike groups, coordinate with space-based assets, and synchronize strikes with cyber operations to create cascading effects on enemy systems. This is 21st century warfare, not mass armies clashing on battlefields, but precision strikes launched from multiple vectors simultaneously, coordinated in real time through secure networks that span the globe. China's military leadership is paying attention. Their carrier killer missiles, the DF-21D and DF-26, were designed to keep American carriers at bay. But if U.S. hypersonic weapons can strike Chinese launch facilities before those missiles ever leave their silos, the entire A2/AD, anti-access/area denial, strategy falls apart. Russia faces a similar calculation. Their entire defensive posture relies on layers of integrated air defense systems, S-400s, S-500s, early warning radars. Hypersonic weapons can bypass all of that. Strike the radar installations, destroy the command nodes, and suddenly Russian airspace is penetrable by conventional strike aircraft. The hypersonic revolution isn't just about new weapons. It's about fundamentally changing the calculus of deterrence. So what does all of this mean? Why is the United States executing the largest multi-theater force projection in decades? 3 reasons: deterrence, readiness, and flexibility. First, deterrence. Every adversary, Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, is watching how the U.S. responds to challenges. If America appears weak, uncertain, or overstretched, they will exploit it. By demonstrating the ability to deploy massive forces simultaneously across multiple theaters, the Pentagon sends an unmistakable message: we can fight on multiple fronts, and we will win on every one of them. Second, readiness. These aren't just deployments. They're validation exercises. Defender 25 tests whether the Army can actually move division-strength forces from the continental United States to Europe's eastern flank within weeks. The Caribbean Amphibious deployment tests whether Marine expeditionary units can operate in austere environments without established logistics infrastructure. The Mediterranean Carrier Operations test whether 5th-generation aircraft can coordinate with 4th-generation allies in high-threat environments. Every exercise, every deployment, every movement refines doctrine, identifies weaknesses, and builds muscle memory for the day when it's not an exercise. Third, flexibility. The 21st century security environment demands rapid response across multiple domains simultaneously. A crisis in the South China Sea might coincide with Iranian provocations in the Strait of Hormuz. A Russian incursion in the Baltics could occur while cartels attack U.S. border infrastructure. The U.S. military is designed to handle multiple contingencies concurrently, but that requires forward presence, pre-positioned assets, and the ability to surge forces rapidly. That's exactly what we're seeing in 2025. There are costs. Every extended deployment strains maintenance schedules, delays crew rest, and impacts morale. The USS Harry S. Truman's extended deployment in the Middle East meant sailors spent months longer away from families. Keeping 2 carrier strike groups in one region pulls assets from other priority theaters, particularly the Pacific, where China remains the pacing threat. But the Pentagon's calculus is clear. The cost of presence is less than the cost of absence. If adversaries believe the U.S. lacks the will or capability to respond to aggression, they will test those assumptions. And by the time diplomatic solutions fail, military options become far more costly. Wars are prevented by the visible willingness to fight them. That's the central truth of deterrence, and it's why the U.S. military is moving these massive forces right now. Not because conflict is inevitable, but because demonstrating overwhelming capability makes conflict less likely. Every tanker that crosses the Atlantic, every Marine who boards an amphibious assault ship, every hypersonic missile positioned forward sends a signal. To allies, we will stand with you. To adversaries, test us at your peril. The world is watching. Beijing is calculating whether Taiwan is worth risking war with a nation that can deploy carrier strike groups faster than they can mobilize landing craft. Tehran is weighing whether supporting proxy attacks is worth facing stealth bombers armed with bunker-busting munitions. Moscow is reconsidering whether NATO's eastern flank is as vulnerable as they once believed. These deployments aren't just about today's threats. They're about shaping tomorrow's strategic environment. Every exercise refines interoperability with allies. Every deployment strengthens partnerships. Every demonstration of capability raises the threshold for aggression. But there's a deeper question that these movements raise. Is America willing to sustain this level of global engagement indefinitely? Because maintaining this posture requires resources, political will, and public support. It requires young men and women willing to spend months at sea, in austere conditions, far from home. It requires taxpayers willing to fund the most expensive military in human history. And it requires political leaders willing to make difficult decisions about when presence becomes intervention and when deterrence requires action. The world is watching what the United States does next, because how America responds to today's challenges, whether with strength or hesitation, unity or division, resolve or retreat, will determine the shape of the world for decades to come. And right now, the message from every ocean, every continent, every contested space is clear. America is present, America is ready, and America is watching back.